Well, hello and welcome back. We are continuing our series where we're looking at MySQL, MariaDB, and just using those as sort of a SQL tutorial. Today, we're getting started. We've created our database, and so now we're going to create tables. Now, the concept of a table is if it was a spreadsheet, it would be one of the worksheets within that spreadsheet. You have columns, you have rows. And one of the things we will talk about is that you have a way to talk about every specific row that may not have anything to do with the values that are on it. So let's start with looking at creating a table. So with a create table, you start with create and then table and then give it a name. So we're going to call this table tutorial_1. And then you've got some parentheses. You can see open and close parentheses. And then it's going to be a series of fields. And then there's going to be some additional things that may show up that have to do with rules around those fields. And we'll talk about each one of these. So first one we've got T_1_ID. This is this next little thing, which is the name. So that's the name of our field. It'll be like our column name. This is the data type, the next thing. In this case, it's an int, which is an integer. You can also see we can get away with integer as our type. And we have some other types here, which we'll talk about. We'll go ahead and talk about now. So we have a varchar. Now notice an int is it's just a number. It knows roughly how big this number is supposed to be by default. A varchar is a string or a text. So a varchar would be a length of, in this case, up to 100 characters for this value that we're going to call, the name is name. And we'll call this, actually let's call this address name. We'll change it to that. And so it's, because it's a varchar, that 100 spaces is up to or characters in length is the maximum that will take up in space. Since it's with that VAR part of it, it's different from just a char that we see below. A char automatically allocates a spot for every possible item that could be in there. So if it was a char 100, it would allocate 100 characters in memory. The variable one here, VAR, is only going to allocate what's needed for that string. So if it's a 10-character string, we're saving 90 characters in memory, which, as the database grows, can be very crucial. Now, the chars, as I said, same thing. It's also a text or string kind of field. It also has a length, but it automatically allocates out to that length. So you want it to be something that is pretty close to static, or from record to record about the same in length, ideally. Like state would be perfect, or country code. If you use a 3-letter country code, then it would be a char 3. Those kinds of things where all the fields are going to use exactly that amount. So that helps quite a bit. We have integer, which is our zip code. Now our zip code could be an integer or it could be a string. Depends on how we want to do it. We're going to leave it as an integer just because there's some things we can work with. Now the next thing after the type is either going to be null or not null. And these are not all required. We'll show you a little further down here. So not null means it is a required field. I have to have a value for this on every record. Doesn't mean I have to send it one when I create the record, because there may be a default value that it will assign that, even if I don't assign a value, which is what we're going to find in this case for our primary key. And auto increment is for an integer. And it's basically every time you put a record in there, it's going to start at 1, or you can set it to a certain starting number, and then it's just going to add 1 to that each time. So if you do, when we do record 1, we'll see it's going to have an ID, the T1 ID of 1. The next record is going to have T1 ID of 2, and so forth. Now notice, so we've got null or not null, means it's required. We have null, which means it is not required. So I don't have to enter a state at all. It can be empty and it's not going to care. And this one has nothing. By default, it is null, which means you don't have to set a value. And then everything else is defaulted out essentially. So I can do a sort of shorthand for creating this table. And then here, I'm going to say that this, with this line, T1 ID is the primary key, which means I only have, it is a unique value across the database or across the table. So row 1, if T1 ID, because that's my primary key, if it's 1, I can't put another row in there that has a T1 ID equal of 1. And that allows us to specifically address certain rows in the table. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to pop over here and somewhere in here, there we go. I'm going to use my tutorial database, which is one we're going to use through most of this stuff. And now, let's see, do I have tables in here? I don't have any tables in here because I haven't created anything yet. But now if I create the table, so there we go, create OK, 0 rows affected. Now, jump up there. Now if I do show tables, I can see that I have table tutorial 1. And if I use DESC, as in like describe, let's blow this up a little bigger. There. And the table name, tutorial 1, then it shows me what I just created. And you can see here where it's like integer, it actually set a size to integer. So that's going to be out to 11 characters, 11 bytes. You can see your varchar with that 100 that was up here, varchar 50, your char 2. So you can see all of those. Now, I think we looked at this before, but in order to see what's in a table, I do select. And star means just give me all of the columns. So I'm going to select star from, because it's basically select columns from table name, tutorial 1. In this case, I don't care about anything else. So I just like give me all the table, all the rows. And there are no rows. However, I can do this. Let's see. I'm not going to use T1 ID. I'm going to use address name. I'm going to use city, state, zip. Address name, city, state, zip. Good. Okay, and I'm going to do my values. And let's just do name 1. And I'm using a single quote around each of these string type things. So name 1, city 1. Oops, I need my quotes. And I'll show you, actually, let me do it this way. So it'll be state 1 and zip code 12345. Now, I'm going to do that. Notice I didn't put my quotes around S1, so it's going to complain. It says unknown column. It thinks that's a column name instead of a string. So I can put quotes around it. But note that with the number, since it's a number, which has to do with some of the naming conventions, that since it knows it's a number, we don't have to worry about it getting confused. We don't need quotes. Now, if we do our select, we can see our record in there. If we do it again, we're going to start another record. So let's do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, state 2, city 2, name 2, and then we do select star. We can see here that we have these 2 rows are in there, and we can see that the ID, that T1 ID, was 1 for the first one, 2 for the second one. Now, something about that, if we do delete from, so we're going to delete a record, which is delete from tutorial 1, and we tell it where, and we're going to give it some information. So where T1 ID equals 2, if we do that, boom, we're down to 1. But now, if we go back and just reinsert that record, that record 2, and do a select, you can see that the T1 ID is now 3 because it deleted that, but it didn't reset the count, the auto increment for that. So we're good. It says, okay, I'm just going to keep on going. And so now my new ID is 3. Now I can also, if I come in, let's do 3, 3, and 3. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it, because that's using the default. If I instead give it a T1 ID, in this case, then I'm going to see, now I entered it and it said it as 1. If I tried to insert it as 1 100 again. Now it's saying there's a duplicate. But if I come in and I create a record 4 without entering 1, so let's go look here. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to say, okay, use the default. What's the default after I just gave it a 100? It is 101. So it said, okay, you set it to a value, so I'm going to reset the value, the count value. Now, with each of these, let's see, what else did I want to cover? Auto record number, simple select. Okay, good. We're in good shape. So the one other thing we can look at is if we want to get rid of a table, we can do, it's just drop table and then table name. So tutorial 1. Now if I do that, and now I show tables, I have no tables. So now I got to go back and create my table again. But let me do this. I have, this time I'm going to use, if I look at table1.sql, I have a creation here. And oops, I'm going to change it to address name. And note that if you want to use comments, these little, you can do a dash, hyphen, hyphen, gives you a comment. So if I save this, there we go. And I'll go back to the database. And what's my password? And I do use tutorial. And then I use that source. If you remember that from last time, I do source table1.sql. Then it doesn't tell me what it ran, but I can go back and look, and I'm going to see that that table exists. But it doesn't have any data now because we dropped it. When we drop a table, we drop all of the data in it as well. Now, if you want to sort of reset a table like that, you can use a script like I had. And nice little bonuses is you can come in and you can say, I'm going to go ahead and drop the table if it exists, because otherwise, let me just do this. If I try to create it and it does exist, let me do that. Let's see if then if I try to create it and it does exist, it's going to say it already exists. So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to come out of here. And I'm going to want to say, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and drop it. But first, I want to make sure I'm in the right database. So if I use this as my script, now I can come in, and regardless of where I'm at, I can do source table1.sql, and it's going to give me there. Oh, and it's probably going to do there. I'm already in the table or the correct database, and I will see, boom, my table is there. So there you go. That is it for today. We're going to come back. We're going to continue to work through data types and more tables and more records and lots of different ways we can look at the database. We are just getting started. So hope you go out there and have yourself a great day, a great week, and we will talk to you next time. 3, 2, 1.